All back in the room, those that are coming back. That's the 5 minutes. There's just some other bodies entering, so I'm going to delay my introduction slightly. So thank you for hanging around. This is now Game Art and Aesthetics Part 2. We are scheduled in this session to only have 2 speakers, which means we're going to try and sort of start afternoon tea 15 minutes early, if it arrives, that is. So the session will be slightly shorter, which means we just have a longer afternoon tea, which hopefully works for you. And then the following session will start on time, as predicted. So in this session, we have 2 speakers. We have Heather Blakey, University of Western Australia, as a video presentation. We've seen Heather before. And Amy Brierley-Beare, University of Adelaide here. So without further ado, can we start? Heather's, thank you.
Researcher and PhD candidate. Hi everyone, my name is Heather. I'm a researcher and PhD candidate in literary studies at the University of Western Australia. I'm really happy to be joining you remotely today to talk about Supergiant Games. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay my deepest respects and gratitude to elders past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be, Whadjuk Noongar Boodja. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the way I use SIANNE Ngai's aesthetic methodology from her 2012 book, Our Aesthetic Categories, as an important theoretical tool in my PhD study, Supergiant Style, which I'm hoping to submit this year. For a bit of a lay of the land, first I'll give a bit of a background to my thesis project overall. I'll give a sort of mini intro to Ngai's work, and then in the interest of time and to provide a bit more of a practical demonstration of where Ngai's theory intersects with my own research, thought I would just talk through a small section of analysis of Hades and talk about how the restless shades interact with Ngai's conception of zaniness in my close playing of the game. For those of you who were at DiGRA last year in Melbourne, you might remember my talk on Bastion and Solastalgia. So some of this information about my thesis may be familiar to you, but I didn't actually have a title for my thesis then, so I have done some work in the interim. My thesis, which is called Supergiant Style, examines the way San Francisco-based independent studio Supergiant Games developed their artistic style over 10 years of game development and 4 published games. The thesis takes a particular interest in the way Supergiant's work explores different representations of home and includes close playings of each game alongside interviews with the development team in the USA. Across my analyses of Supergiant Games' body of work, I propose Supergiant Style is one that provocatively plays with the aesthetic categories of the capitalist scene through the medium of game design. Like Ngai's work, I argue each of Supergiant Games' works acknowledge the styles and dialectic tensions of existing in an era not entirely defined by capitalism and, by extension, settler colonialism, but which inescapably influences human experience and reflection in the everyday. Early on in my thesis, when I was talking about the kind of ideas that I was interested in these games and what I wanted to contribute to this really vibrant critical discourse about what games can do as works of art, one of my supervisors pointed me towards Ngai's work and has possibly regretted it ever since. Ngai is far from the only aesthetic philosopher I discussed in my thesis, of course, but she has informed my thinking and learning significantly, and I kind of wanted to honor that a bit in this presentation. As a bit of a background to Ngai's work doesn't actually speak to video games directly at all, but her categories of the cute, interesting, and zany that she takes as her primary point of study in Our Aesthetic Categories examine some of the most important social dynamics underlying life in the capitalist scene, namely production, circulation, and consumption. In game studies, cuteness has sort of appeared over time and references to Ngai have appeared over time, but what I'm really interested in is Ngai's formulation of the categories themselves. So the cute, interesting, and zany are relatively ambivalent, and they encompass both positive and negative aesthetic experience. The cute is kind of like malleable and possessive. The interesting is wondrous and frustratingly endless. The zany is fun but also stressful. Notably for me, Ngai uses the term to refer to a specific kind of double-sided aesthetic experience. The first side involves the object's style, while the other is action, specifically what we learn to say or do in response to objects we perceive. In my thesis, I suggest this makes Ngai's conceptualization of aesthetic categories themselves really robust and useful in an artistic study of video games, a medium that, I argue, perhaps more than any more before it, is defined by an experience of style, so a game's visual, artful, narrative and genre qualities, and a player's structured behavior towards the video game through play. As I mentioned, I just wanted to jump straight into an example of how Ngai's thinking has informed some of my analysis in my thesis, and to do so I'll talk about Hades. Hades is set in the Greek underworld and players play as Zagreus, the son of Hades. A lot of you will be familiar with this game, I'm sure, but for those that need a bit of a refresher, after a significant falling out with his father, Zagreus decides to run away from home. To leave home, Zagreus must fight his way out of each level of the underworld to reach the surface. If Zagreus is killed during his attempt to escape, he is transported back to the House of Hades, resetting any boons or abilities he had gained during his venture. From this point, Zagreus attempts to escape again, and this cycle informs the foundational structure of Hades. This genre of play, characterized by its repeated effort to overcome a challenging series of fights that escalate in difficulty as the player progresses, is known as a roguelike game. When Zagreus dies during an attempted escape, his return to the House of Hades is when he interacts with other members of the house, reflects on his experiences, and progresses through the narrative of the story through the evolution of his relationships with his family and colleagues. I suggest Hades, then, is in part a game about continued effort, what we might consider as work in an ambivalent sense. Work, as we know, can be playful, it can fail, it can succeed, but these measures, and more specifically the experiences of them, is just as complicated as failure itself. All these feelings are entwined with our context, aesthetic experience, our relationship to value. It is complicated, and as Ngai would argue, it's complicated more so by the ambivalent relation many people have towards modern social and economic order in the capitalist scene. Of Ngai's three aesthetic categories, it is the zany that reflects on this complex matrix of relations about work. The zany is categorized by an experience that is playful and funny, yet at the same time, this playful pleasure inherent to the zany is always accompanied by desperation and precarity. Ngai writes that this expression of precariousness inherent to the zany is linked to a modern precariousness created specifically by the capitalist organization of work. The shades in Hades represent the countless souls of the dead who have come to inhabit the underworld. In their eternal afterlife, the shades in the House of Hades are almost always depicted in some form of work, from those working to prevent Zagreus' escape to the head chef, a gangly shade who resides in the lounge and is seen perpetually cutting onions, as you can see in the video. Shades are, in fact, only really distinguished from each other by the kind of work they are doing. The only time shades are seen not doing anything is when they occasionally hang out in the halls of the House of Hades, seemingly floating from one point to another or bemoaning to each other comedically the moment they died. Despite being dead, which might imply being freed from such mortal concerns as work, the hardworking shades of Hades' underworld always seem to express the potential for precarity. The house contractor, despite being a ghost and thus presumably absolved of injury, wears a hard hat. The head chef shade chops their onions with such vigor and mechanical ferocity that it draws attention to the sharp knife in their hand and the sheer volume of onions being chopped in their endless task. The chef has, perhaps, too many onions coming at her at once, an experience that is not unlike the frantic waves of enemies Zagreus must defeat to escape the underworld. Occasionally, shades will queue up in front of Hades' imposing desk to present their claims and requests. What the shades are asking is illegible to the player, but Hades will respond with approved or denied, causing the shades to emote appropriately. The garbled request from the shades and the severity of the sound of Hades' administrative judgments is funny, but also implies something zany about the shades' existence in the underworld. All their incessant doing has a kind of relation to their level of precarity. Despite their status as ghostly figures, removing the shades from concerns of mortality, Hades playfully subverts what the ghost itself represents, turning them into zany figures that express and reflect on the idea of contemporary work in a way that is cohesive with a wider thematic and gameplay interest in continued effort and systemic resistance in Hades. On that note, I will close this presentation. I am really looking forward to chatting with you more on Discord, and thank you very much for your time and for having me here online. See you soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Heather. And Heather is obviously on Zoom. We can take our questions, but please welcome our next speaker, Amy, here to speak to you in person. Thank you.
Hello. That was excellent, Heather. Thanks. That was fantastic. Hello, my name is Amy. I'm a lecturer from the Uni of Adelaide, soon to be Adelaide Uni. This paper is kind of an offshoot of my main body of research, which looks at romance in games. But romance is often heavily connected to play and domestic spaces, doll play, housing creation, and decoration. Dollhouse play is connected more broadly to simulation play, and I've been exposed to a lot of simulated house building, essentially, in my research. I've been particularly interested mechanically from a first-person perspective, and particularly focusing on living domiciles. I want to break down specific mechanics and aesthetics that allow for wildly kind of different experiences. So this paper is focused on two interesting case studies that were released in the same year. Landlord Super came out of early access with a full release in May 2023 from Minceworks, a British dev who also released the game Jalopy. House Flipper 2 was released in December 2023 from Polish devs who have also made a few games focused on simulations and building, especially in terms of private property, where they have tenants, where they say you deal with problematic renters. Both games were intended to be ongoing experiences, with both initially having a roadmaps for what they wanted to include in their games. However, Landlord Super announced in 2024 that there will be no more updates, and House Flipper 2 continues to go from strength to strength, being one of the most popular building sims on Steam and releasing numerous updates and planned DLC. Despite being productive as text, as kind of Pierce would explore, building simulations predominantly perpetuate neoliberal citizenship, reinforcing the idea that individual responsibility is the only path to personal success, as Vargas, Iglesias, and Mavelli have explored, and numerous other scholars have explored. By understanding how these texts mechanically position player subjectivities, we can recognize how works reinforce or disrupt those economic hegemonies. So I'll first turn to House Flipper 2, as it functions as fairly emblematic of the genre as a whole. House Flipper 2 is an idyllic building and flipping sim where you're encouraged to build beautiful houses, matching decorating themes, and clean up messes of real living, as they call it, as well as create your own houses that you can have people inhabit. So ideally, you take something like this to something like this. House Flipper 2 tasks you with restoring houses to their former glory, flipping these to your utmost ability. It's pleasing to look at. It's colorful, static, staid, fairly Puritan in representations of human living. kind of contrastingly, Landlord Super is also a game focused around building and restoring homes and then flipping or renting them, but it's a lot more grim than House Flipper 2. And the houses sort of always look bad, no matter what you do. In fact, it's kind of become a challenge within the community to make something that actually looks like a house. And it's set during Thatcher-era Britain in a murky Midlands town, and there is tension and clear criticism of the government and the structures of the time. While everything is murky, there is also a layer of nostalgia here and appreciation for detail of experiences from developers who experienced the tail end of this time period. As I said, you can feel criticism of the government and pressures of the crises going on with housing and unemployment, sort of peppered throughout the game. There's a palpable disgust of the transformation of British council housing as the model for similar housing policies that occurred not only in the UK, but became the kind of neoliberal model in many societies, which we still have in many ways today, hooray. As well as these images I explored, you can earn achievements, which are connected to buttons that you can earn. Many of these buttons represent socialist, anti-fascist movements of the time, union posters and popular calls to action, and critical thought surrounding conservatism. So you're set up to be critical, skeptical about what you're doing as a landlord and house flipper, why you're doing it, what system you're contributing to, and what the attitudes expressed here eventuate in when taken to an endpoint. House Flipper 2 takes place in a vaguely Western somewhere, almost any town USA, with occasional European flares. It's always bright and pretty, and it's fairly nondescript. And there are no issues in society other than the ones that you can solve. Amazing. Beyond aesthetics, I want to ascertain mechanically how these two experiences cultivate their particular narratives around flipping private property, drawing from Kiva's understanding of games as arrangements, which constitutes their use players as agents. I want to build on the notion that video games, sites of production, and again, building from Doubleman's understanding of game mechanics, inviting players and agents to perform actions that support the construction of ideological production. Firstly, I want to contrast the gameplay here. So on the left, I have how to build one line of bricks in Landlord Super. So building in Landlord Super is boring. It's excruciating labor. You have to buy all the materials. You can only buy a few at a time. You have to mix your own concrete, which can be poor quality, depending on how much money, how precise you're willing to be, how long you want to take to learn how to mix concrete. Apply your own bricks. You have to apply your own bricks, buy your own paint, your carpet, your wallpaper, your mortar. You have to do your walls, your doors, and installation is very, very, very slow, as you can see me slowly working through it. And here is the process of building a wall in House Flipper 2. Amazing. Whereas most of this process in House Flipper 2 is mediated by screens and materials not having to be mixed together. It's fun, satisfying, and quick and streamlined. The actual play here in Landlord Super is boring and tedious, whereas in House Flipper 2, it's fun and engaging. You can see this in player responses as well. Again, as I said, people in Landlord Super just try to make something that functions, whereas in House Flipper 2, the aesthetic rewards of the mechanical play is evident. In House Flipper 2, people are mediated through emails. You never see anyone other than through photographs in their homes and occasionally through avatars on email. Whereas it's very clear who you're selling these houses to in Landlord Super. You're either aiming at the government, which if these houses are poorly constructed is slightly sinister, or you're aiming at three groups of people. Again, I'm quoting the game here: working class louts, middle class grafters, or the rich and snobby well-off yuppies. And you can actually go and visit your tenants who are generally unhappy to see you and have complaints about your poor construction and maintenance that you can just ignore like they do in real life. Again, House Flipper 2 has an idealistic suburban cul-de-sac aesthetic and design, and also this translates to play with everything being streamlined, meaning there's no real way to fail. It's just doing tasks to get essentially more of what you want. Again, I think it's interesting that people aren't seen in this world, but it's indicative of the mindset that you're in. It's only you, you're important, everyone else is away, material domestic life and currency is ultimate. Wherein in Landlord Super is crass and crude. If you're going to take a picture of me during this, please take it with this so I can show my mum. It's crass and crude, purposely so. There are pubs, there's gambling. If you're going through hardship, there are unemployment benefits, which is so far the only representation I've seen of this in a commercially published game, but I'd have to keep researching. You can also be, to quote the game, a benefit cheat. People smoke, they swear, the cops are violent and vindictive, and there. You can also physically go to the bathroom in the first person, which, again, it seems odd to point out, but most games that include this in this genre are either hedonic in their content, i.e. Why they're displaying this, i.e. Duke Nukem and sort of Postal. But in Landlord Super, you really do need to eat, drink, and defecate. You have real weather conditions that actually mean you have to stop making your houses, and they damage your houses as well. And you have real money, i.e. actual pounds, to deal with. House Flipper 2 has its fake currency, again, separating you from anything other than that USA gated community that they've created. Mechanizing these things, especially you can see energy, calories, bladder, hygiene, sobriety. Mechanizing these things reminds players that there are pressures outside of what they're doing. They have health concerns, if nothing else. House Flipper 2 lets you continue on forever. There isn't any person, it's just a house flipping machine. In this way, you're constantly pushed to do things in Landlord Super for the sake of making money, to keep your head afloat, which includes heavily cutting down on the requirements of the house. Essentially, you build it shoddy because you can feel that pressure. House Flipper 2, you can make it beautiful because you've got infinite time. As I said, Landlord Super has benefits, which I mentioned before, because you need to eat. You can also see the price of benefits versus other food and other materials, and it's really not enough to make ends meet. It's worth noting as well that the people at the pub and the people at the benefits office are the only kind people kind of represented in the whole game. One of the workers, Kashmaran, is so nice that if the player passes out, they are inexplicably the ones to help them out, as evidenced by this card. Oops, sorry. Here she basically says to take better care of yourself. Everyone else in the game basically treats you like dirt or like you're trying to get something out of them. And this is especially interesting because the game encourages you to steal resources from her backyard to fund your landlording and then actively criticizes you when you do so. Whereas most game in this genre, particularly House Flipper 2, create a separated world where our political struggles, house crises, unemployment, government assistance, substance abuse and addiction. Landlord Super showcases a world where you are not only shown the impact of these elements on everyday life, the creation of shelter, you're mechanically encouraged to cheapen out experiences as a means of continuing. But what do you receive for making money in the game? You receive judgment and a reminder of the potential effects of what you've done. They call you a secret Tory. House Flipper 2 has fairly uncritical awards that tell you how well you've done for earning money, selling houses, much different to Landlord Super criticizing you for making any money. I argue that it's really important to recognize the unfun elements of this play and the way Landlord Super positions players to be critical and recognize the futility of continuing in this system. It's worth recognizing this particularly as the simulator genre has become so fraught and saturated with mechanically dissonant and at times slightly cheap experiences. It actively bucked its genre conventions and it paid dearly for it, especially according to the developer who, again, made a very sad Steam post talking about all the plans he had for it. It's also interesting, if I skip, to place House Flipper 2 when considering the history of Polish facade in architecture after World War II and placing it within the canon of fairly distinct popular AA indie titles. Especially interesting considering the rise of that architecture they mentioned. We've essentially got these buildings painted with facades to appear if everything is more colourful and joyful than the sock modern as Onawaska would explore, would articulate. Kelly argued that the game Papers, Please used boring duties of labour to rethink the politics of games and gameplay experiences. I argue I want to further that here and argue that the tediousness of flipping a house positions players to streamline their play, avoiding these mechanics and questioning the value of what they've made. Again, borrowing from Kelly creates a subjectivity formation, demanding that the player inhabits a mechanized mindset that sees them in a cog in this unsatisfying process. The downside of this is that it makes a generally unappealing and inaccessible game to most players, again, as evidenced by the ceased support for the game, whereas something like House Flipper 2 is affirming in its narrative of success, being possible through hard work, labour is something satisfying, the world is something beautiful and worth contributing to, and struggle is essentially something forgotten. It sees success and will no doubt continue. The value of Landlord Super then is that it used its play to make a statement in a genre that is so set on the myth of the magnanimous, hardworking landlord. Thank you.
Thank you. Pass that to me. Thank you so much, Amy. Please remain standing, and Heather joins us online as well. We can take 15 minutes for questions. If there's any questions in the room, I'll come round to start. Thank you.
Hi, Steph, RMIT. Great panel, both of you. My question's for Amy. I was just hoping you could speak a little bit more about the ideologies of the space of a house in games, maybe more broadly. I'm sure I wasn't the only person maybe making some comparisons to like The Sims, which is a very kind of gendered dollhouse game. And you opened your presentation by talking about dollhouses, but in both of these games, they sort of center the labor on more like a tradie style labor, right? And you also mentioned there's not a lot of people around. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that dollhouse framing and as a part two, how these games are also received culturally too. What kind of people are playing these games or how are they marketed?
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting.
Sorry, I can repeat that if that was a lot.
No, that's good. That's good. Maybe I'll get you to repeat the second part of it when I finish.
Sure. I'm excited by your talk.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Yeah, again, one thing I have loved studying in terms of looking at how when we're decorating spaces and how this is marketed and positioned. And one thing I talk about in actually my thesis was looking at how Fallout 76 like refused to use words like decorate and like wallpaper and hairstyles. They use these really gruff, more masculinized terms, and that's really evident here, I would say, in Landlord Super. But I will say there is, I couldn't get into it, but there's an entire kind of IKEA catalog, and there's so many interesting elements of decoration that all again end up looking terrible because of the kind of design of it. But there was really a true attempt to kind of explore those different elements, but it wasn't marketed in that sense at all. Yeah, especially when looking at these domestic spaces, again, we have to think of who's positioned there, who's positioned to be doing what, because again, so much of this focuses on the external rather than that internal. And again, we know the gendered divisions that are occurring there. What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
I'll ask you that later. I have a different one I'd rather hear you speak on now.
Okay.
Do those games have interior decorating at all?
Oh, they both do. Yeah.
Okay, and how is that framed?
It's framed as kind of an afterthought. It's framed as a checklist of things you have to. Well, Landlord Super definitely is, and House Flipper 2 is a little more. I suppose it's got the creative layer of play, so you can kind of you can take us into the sandbox mode. But Landlord Super kind of treats it as a checklist. You have to have a fridge, you have to have a couch, and it has to be. They actually separate the catalogs into their class system, so you have to buy more expensive things for yuppies, right? You have to buy. You can get away with cheaper stuff, IKEA knockoff stuff. For the grafters. So that's how they kind of engage in that way. Whereas House Flipper 2, it's more how would you like it to look, and you may be doing it for particular tenants who are going, and you're going to change things in the house, and that's kind of, you're not really given much creativity there, or it's totally up to you and how you engage.
Yeah, great. I'll pick your brain a bit more later. Thank you.
And more hands in the room, thanks.
I'm sorry. I have a question about the Landlord game and similar games because obviously it's a rarity to have a game that's like, here's the working class experience, here's struggling with unemployment, etc. And that's a lot like TV shows. Malcolm in the Middle is a rarity. Most shows, people don't have to worry about rent. You know, the friends in Friends are magically fiscal. Do you have, and it's obviously a huge can of worms, do you have a favorite theory as to why most games do this power fantasy pretend reality thing? Yeah, pick one.
I couldn't. I mean, I don't. I need to think about that. I don't know if I want to go on record as one particular theory as to why. Look, I can speculate here why. I can imagine why it would be tempting to not have to think about rent and all these sorts of like employment and having to deal with your landlord. I can see why that would be appealing to most, especially I mean all around the world, but Australia, housing crisis, like, you know, lots of different reasons why you wouldn't want to engage with that. I would want to do a lot more reading before I went on record as saying the exact theory as to why there would be so many different factors. But I do really enjoy looking at games that kind of present that other side of particularly something like Cart Life or something, right, that really explores poverty and what it means to have be operating in these sort of working class conditions.
Thank you. Heather, I had a question for you about your research. Mm-hmm. I think you're doing fantastic work in terms of applying some of Ngai's work to games. I think there's been a bit of an undercurrent at this conference over the past couple of days around how and why do people engage with games in particular ways, and I think that Ngai's aesthetic categories are really important in giving us clues to that. I really enjoyed the fact that you're applying those specifically to games. I was wondering if you're aware there's a publication out which takes one of Ngai's categories of cute, and I think it's called Cute Accelerationism. It's a book from about 3 years ago, and it really just sort of interrogates how cute is. Yeah, so
is it this one?
That's exactly the book.
It is on my desk. Yeah, I'm writing a review of it at the moment. So
yeah, so we're not just on the.
Which is
we're
awful.
Not just on the same page. We're on the same book.
Yes,
and,
yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I guess extending from that, are you focusing, I suppose, on specifically cute as a category, and are you specifically focusing on sorry, is it Supergiant, the game?
Yeah, Supergiant Games.
So I'm wondering if you're sort of tilting towards the aesthetic categories and specifically to cute, or whether your research is much more focused on the company. If you could discuss that sort of weighting a little bit more in your research.
Yeah, sure. I think I know how to answer that, but I will do my best. In terms of my research, what I'm really interested, I'm from literary studies, so my interest came at looking at Supergiant Games as kind of not like, I guess, kind of like an author, but looking at a body of work that was cohesive. Something that was really striking to me about them is that the same people who were working on Bastion back in like 2008, 2009 are still part of the team and working on like Hades 2. And there's this kind of like really interesting narrative about independent development that I was quite captured by. But what I wanted to do was kind of look at their games as they are. It's kind of like individual works and kind of see the kinds of stylistic threads that were developing across their game development cycle, I suppose. So in terms of, I have two-part answer to this question. One, I think it's really, really interesting, and I yap about this all the time, that cuteness is by far the section of Ngai's work that gets kind of used the most, which I think is really funny because it kind of demonstrates Ngai's point that cute kind of, we think we kind of possess cute things. We have sort of like power over them. But Ngai's whole thesis about it is that the cute expresses power back on us and makes demands of us. So it's interesting, I think, trend in the literature that cuteness is so prolific, where I think the interesting and zany are kind of like equally as interesting and important. But throughout my thesis, I do sort of look at all three categories from that book. But also I like Ngai's methodology in constructing the categories, because I think it gives opportunity to think about what other aesthetic categories might be present in the work. One slight, I'm not 100% sure if this is correct or what I will say in my final thesis, but last year I gave a talk on solastalgia in Bastion, and one of the sort of like propositions that I'm also making about that is that solastalgia can also be understood as an aesthetic category, because it is kind of like a form, but also it's only solastalgia if there's a kind of like judgment or reaction to it. So that's a little bit more speculative. Anyways, I don't know if that answered your question. Do let me know if it didn't, and I can answer it better.
Hugh was nodding a lot while you were answering. So
Okay, that's good to know.
Brendan Keogh, QT.
Hello.
Thanks both. Hi, Heather. Incredible panel. They're both really, really great papers. I just had probably a pretty basic question for Amy. I haven't played Landlord Super, but I found that for bricklaying really interesting, because for tediousness of, so my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Landlord Super seems like it's ultimately trying to be critical of certain social things like capitalism, landlordism, Thatcherism, etc. But like that moment where like the fact that it's more tedious to lay bricks seems to be implying landlords actually do work. Like it's an actual labor process. Like it implies that's not landlordism, that's like building, right? There's actual labor there, which I don't know, like is there a contradiction there, or am I missing the point or something?
No, I think that's very true. And I think that's something ultimately in that they clearly wanted you to be able to build houses, that there's that tension there. I do think, I guess in a way they might be saying, because basically you're building a whole really shocking house, that it's all a landlord super, and that you then maintain. But no, I think that is just, unfortunately a kind of tension involved there. Again, I think it is widely critical of systems as well, and even though it's kind of an echo as you're kind of playing it, but I think it's critical of the systems and the government and the structures that have kind of led to this level of kind of thinking and how these houses were being built, and kind of breaking it down in that sense. So yeah, I think it's kind of a compromise that they made to kind of explore what they wanted to explore. And again, I do think they were attempting to make something that they could kind of have both ways, that could be economically viable, especially judging by what the developer said they wanted to do. And again, I think what DLC they were going to bring out. But it just didn't work, unfortunately. But that's very true.
Hello, David Harold, QT. A question for Heather. Well done, by the way, both papers. So you mentioned a concept of the capitalist scene, which to me is very fascinating. But both from your presentation and your abstract, I'm kind of wondering, like, I know the concept of capitalist scene from ecological crisis, climate crisis. I'm just wondering, like, if your use of the term is meant as more of like a classical capitalism critique, or if you feel like this is also in comparison to, for example, Anthropocene, or well, you also mentioned settler colonialism, right? So like the plantationist scene, or those kind of, or Cthulhu scene for that matter, right? You're probably working on your theory in your thesis as well. So what are your thoughts on that? The distinction between those scenes.
I guess for me, I'm a big like Arundhati Roy, Amitav Ghosh girly. They I have read them for years, and for me, I think it's in Ghosh's book, The Nutmeg's Curse. There are plenty of people who have, like, as you say, like talked about the capitalist scene and things like that, but he prefers and advocates for the term because as you probably know, like it advocates for our current era being kind of like caused by this extractive system rather than the individual human. And just on a kind of like personal and philosophical level, that just really aligns with what I believe as well. And playing through Supergiant Games works and spending so much time with them, I think games like are inherently interested in systems, and a lot of Supergiant's work is about kind of like pushing back and I guess playing with what that system can do in terms of like failure and truth and gameplay and things like that. So yeah, that's probably a little bit of a woolly answer to your question, but you know, I think this collection of games is interested in sort of like environmental damage, and specifically environmental damage caused by like extractive colonialism, as well as more sort of like the way that work is kind of integrated into the home and the way work kind of traps us perhaps, or keeps us in a kind of like stasis. So yes, that is my very woolly answer, and I'm happy to talk more. Yes.
Thank you for the questions, and please join me in thanking our two speakers. They've done Heather and Amy have done a wonderful job. We are going to try and end this session slightly earlier, so there's only two of you, so thank you so much for delivering such interesting work. And thank you for the questions throughout the two sessions. So it is afternoon tea. It's an extended afternoon tea. I'd also like to invite you to go upstairs. There is an arcade. I've been given no more information other than an arcade machine is there for you to experience. So please enjoy that as well. And I thank you again for bearing with me as I stumbled through this. Thank you so much.